Father Thomas's voice carried through the cathedral, the sunlight from the stained glass casting colors over the marble floor. Isabella Grace Hartman stood at the altar, her hand in Jonathan's as the vows began. I vow to protect you, in peace or in peril. The words had barely left her lips when the cathedral doors exploded open. 12 armed men stormed in, and all they saw was a helpless bride. But beneath the lace and silk stood Valkyrie, a woman trained to end wars. One swing of a brass candlestick, one heartbeat, and the leader's AR-15 was in her hands. In the next 4 minutes, she would become a legend, and no one in that cathedral would ever see her the same way again. The late afternoon sun washed St. Augustine Cathedral in New Orleans with a warm, amber glow, its Gothic arches and centuries-old stonework catching every beam of light. Stained glass windows painted the marble floor with jewel-like patterns, sapphire, ruby, emerald, while the air carried the faint mingling scents of polished wood and fresh lilies. To the untrained eye, it was a scene of unshakable serenity, a perfect setting for the vows about to be spoken. At the center of it all stood Isabella Grace Hartman, 31 years old, her auburn hair swept into a simple but elegant style, the kind that suggested grace without vanity. On her face rested the calm poise of a bride, but behind her green eyes was something else entirely, a quiet alertness born from years in places where a second's hesitation could mean death. She had once been a covert operative, her call sign Valkyrie, trained to survive and prevail in situations no ordinary soldier would walk away from. Now she wore ivory silk instead of combat fatigues, but the instincts remained, coiled beneath the surface. To her right stood Jonathan Miles Carter, a tall, steady presence in a perfectly cut navy tuxedo. His time as a U.S. Marine had given him the posture and quiet confidence of someone who had faced the worst and lived to tell about it. These days he taught military history at Tulane University, a life far quieter than the battlefields they both once knew, though neither of them ever truly left those worlds behind. His dark eyes softened when they met hers, the kind of gaze that made even the most fortified heart lower its guard. The cathedral pews were filled with 200 guests, family, friends, and a scattering of faces from their past. The front row held Margaret Hartman, Isabella's mother, a retired Army nurse whose hands had once stitched soldiers back together in dusty field hospitals. Her pride in her daughter was evident in every smile, every tear she brushed away. Beside her sat Detective Samuel Hartman, Isabella's father, his posture as straight as the day he retired from the New Orleans Police Department. Years of interrogations and crime scenes had honed his instincts, and today those instincts were on low simmer as he kept a quiet watch over the room. The string quartet's rendition of Pachelbel's canon floated upward into the cathedral's vaulted ceilings. Conversations hushed as the ceremony began. Father Thomas, clad in white and gold vestments, stepped to the front, his voice carrying easily in the vast space. From the outside, Isabella seemed every bit the serene bride, her hand in Jonathan's, a faint smile on her lips. But inside, the old habits refused to sleep. As Father Thomas spoke the opening lines, she let her gaze sweep the cathedral. She counted the exits without thinking. 2 main doors at the back, side entries flanking the transept, a service hallway behind the altar. She clocked the placement of the ushers and recognized one of the photographers had a stance that suggested military training. It wasn't paranoia, it was muscle memory. She wasn't looking for threats. She was confirming there were none. Her breath slowed. She let herself focus on the moment. The vows were next. I vow to protect you, in peace or in peril, she said softly, and Jonathan's fingers tightened around hers. The words made him smile, a private smile, one that understood there was more truth in them than most grooms would ever suspect. For a moment it felt as though nothing could touch them here, in this sanctuary of light and devotion. But deep within her, Isabella knew the truth every veteran learns. Calm can be a fragile thing, and peace is only one unguarded moment away from being broken. That was when, somewhere in the depths of her awareness, the smallest ripple of unease brushed against her mind. Nothing she could name, just the faintest shift in the air, as if the cathedral itself was holding its breath. The last note of the quartet's melody still lingered in the air when it happened. With a deafening crack, the massive oak doors at the back of St. Augustine Cathedral slammed open so hard they rattled in their hinges. The echo thundered through the vaulted space, shattering the fragile stillness. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the reality of what had just happened slammed into the room like a cold front. 12 armed men spilled into the cathedral, their dark silhouettes framed against the daylight outside. Black tactical gear, faces hidden by balaclavas, boots pounding against marble. The sound was mechanical, disciplined. This wasn't chaos, it was an operation. At their head strode Victor Kane. Easily over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered and thick with muscle, he carried an AR-15 like it was an extension of his arm. A voice modulator distorted his commands into a deep metallic snarl. He didn't shout to be heard. He spoke with the steady authority of someone used to being obeyed. Stay where you are. Nobody moves, nobody dies. On either side of the entrance, Lars and Mendez pivoted into position with MP5 submachine guns, sweeping the crowd. Their barrels tracked slowly, warning anyone who even thought about running for the side doors. Isabella's mind registered the rest in seconds. 3 gunmen, Rico, Dawson, and Brett, fanned out down the left aisle, Glocks in hand, each taking a segment of the pews. 2 others, Silva and Harlan, slid into positions along the right transept, each carrying a 12-gauge pump-action shotgun. The remaining 4, Kurt, Mason, and Victor, moved in staggered formation deeper into the nave, providing overlapping fields of fire with Kane. They were methodical, experienced, not amateurs looking for a quick score. Guests screamed, some ducked behind pews, others froze entirely, hands over their mouths. The air thickened with fear. Isabella caught sight of her mother, Margaret, her hand instinctively reaching toward the crucifix around her neck. Her father, Detective Samuel Hartman, had already shifted his weight, eyes scanning for a weapon he didn't have. Phones, jewelry, wallets. Now, Kane ordered, pacing forward with deliberate steps. You cooperate, and you walk out of here breathing. You don't? He let the unfinished sentence hang, the barrel of his rifle doing the rest of the talking. Isabella stood perfectly still at the altar, veil cascading down her shoulders. To anyone watching, she might have looked paralyzed with fear. Inside, every sense was awake, sharpened. 12 men, 8 with handguns or shotguns, 4 with automatic weapons, 1 AR-15 within striking distance if I can close the gap. Her eyes flicked to the side aisle. Lars had shifted his stance, more focused on keeping a panicked usher in place than on covering the altar. Mendez, however, was locked in, weapon steady. This wasn't going to be a simple rush and disarm. Kane's gaze swept over the crowd, then landed on the front row. An elderly man, later she'd learned his name was Elliot Brooks, fumbled with his wallet, hands trembling. The gunman named Dawson stepped closer, Glock raised. Move faster, old man. Isabella's pulse kicked harder, but her breathing stayed slow. She could hear her instructors' voices from years ago. Threat hierarchy. Closest danger first. Nearest weapon next. Keep moving. She took one slow step forward, letting her gown drag across the marble, drawing Kane's attention without spooking him. Please, don't hurt him, she said, her voice steady, almost pleading. He's just scared. Kane tilted his head, as if amused. Well, look who's got a voice after all. He stepped closer, the AR-15 angled casually toward the floor, but still in his hands. Hand over that rock on your finger, princess, and maybe Grandpa gets to live through today. Isabella's fingers moved toward her ring, but she wasn't thinking about jewelry. She was calculating distance. 4 steps to close in, 1 swing to disarm, 2 seconds before the others register. In her peripheral vision, Lars's MP5 dipped slightly. Mendez had glanced toward a woman sobbing near the back. Kane took another step. You know, his gaze flicked down her dress. That gown's worth more than most people here make in a year. Maybe we take that too. Gasps rippled through the congregation. Samuel Hartman started to rise from his seat, but Isabella's eyes cut to him, sharp, commanding. Dad, stay down. That was when she felt the shift, the moment before the first move in a fight, the breath before the storm breaks. Her grip tightened around the heavy brass candlestick at the altar. It wasn't a rifle, but in trained hands it could be a weapon. She could already feel the balance, the arc, the point of impact. The room was a powder keg, and Isabella knew exactly where to strike the match. The tension in the cathedral was wound so tight it felt like the walls themselves might shatter. The air was heavy with fear, the kind that keeps people frozen in place. Elliot Brooks, the frail elderly man in the third row, was still fumbling with his wallet. His thin hands shook, and his voice cracked as he whispered apologies to the gunman looming over him. Dawson's Glock was leveled squarely at Elliot's head, his finger brushing the trigger guard. Isabella's instincts screamed. She'd seen that stance before. The way the gunman's shoulders rolled forward, the way his gaze had narrowed. He wasn't bluffing. She had seconds, maybe less. Please, Isabella's voice cut through the chaos, clear and strong. Don't hurt him. He's no threat to you. The words made Kane turn his head toward her. He smirked under the black fabric of his mask, as if amused that the trembling bride would dare to speak. You want to negotiate, sweetheart? Fine. Give me your ring, and maybe I tell my man to keep his finger off the trigger. Isabella lifted her left hand slightly, her veil shifting as she did. To the crowd, it looked like compliance. But inside, every muscle in her body coiled like a spring. Her eyes darted, not toward Dawson, but toward Lars by the entrance. The man's MP5 had dipped again, his attention sliding toward a commotion near the side aisle, where a guest was sobbing uncontrollably. Mendez had also turned slightly, his line of sight no longer locked on the altar. Kane stepped closer, closing the gap. His AR-15 was in his right hand, angled low in what he thought was a casual, dominating stance. But Isabella saw it for what it was, a momentary lapse in defensive positioning. 4 feet between them, one heartbeat to commit, her right hand slid behind her back, fingers finding the base of the heavy brass candlestick on the altar. It was cold, solid, perfectly weighted. She remembered her old instructor's voice. If you move to finish. No half measures. Take it off, Kane ordered. She smiled faintly. Gladly. Then she moved. The candlestick came up in a swift, fluid arc, her arm swinging from the shoulder with controlled violence. The heavy brass connected with the underside of Kane's rifle, knocking the muzzle up and away. In the same motion, she stepped into him, her knee slamming into his solar plexus. The air left his lungs in a guttural grunt. Before he could recover, she pivoted her hips, driving her elbow into the base of his skull. Kane dropped, his AR-15 tumbling from his grip. Isabella caught it mid-fall, flipping it into a ready position with a fluidity that came from years of muscle memory. Gasps erupted from the guests. Some ducked lower, others froze in disbelief. Gun! Lars barked from the entrance. But by the time the word left his mouth, Isabella was already moving. Her first shot was controlled, precise, center mass on Dawson, who had been distracted by Elliot. The man crumpled backward, weapon clattering across the marble. Isabella pivoted instantly, using the altar as partial cover as she brought the AR-15 to bear on Lars. 2 rounds rang out. Lars dove for the side but was clipped in the shoulder, his MP5 skittering away across the floor. Mendez swung his weapon toward the altar, but Isabella dropped low, sliding behind a pew as splinters erupted from the wood above her. She could feel the shift in the room now. The gunman's perfect control was fracturing, the rhythm of their intimidation broken. Guests scrambled toward the far side aisles, instinctively moving as Isabella's actions carved open lanes of escape. Kane groaned on the floor, one hand reaching for the sidearm at his belt. Isabella kicked it away without looking, her focus already scanning for the next target. The AR-15 felt like an old friend in her hands. Its weight, its balance, the subtle feedback from each controlled burst. Every shot she fired was calculated. 1 to disable, 2 to disarm. Never reckless, never wasting ammunition. Elliot Brooks was now on his knees, hands over his head, staring at her with wide, disbelieving eyes. She gave him a single nod, calm, deliberate, before shifting her attention back to the remaining threats. From the far right transept, Silva and Harlan began advancing, their shotguns pumping. Isabella ducked behind a column, using its wide base as a shield. She leaned out just far enough to send a short burst their way, forcing them to dive for cover among the pews. "Drop your weapons," she called, her voice carrying through the cathedral's acoustics, not as a plea but as an order. No one obeyed, her lips pressed into a thin line. Fine. Then she'd finish this the way she knew how. She moved again, low and fast, weaving between the pews. To the gunman, she seemed to vanish and reappear at impossible angles, her wedding dress a ghostly flash in the shifting light of the stained glass. In less than 40 seconds, 3 men were down, the leader was unconscious, and the rest were realizing that the helpless bride they'd seen when they walked in was something else entirely. She was Valkyrie, and she was just getting started. The cathedral had become a war zone. Shards of wood from shattered pews littered the marble floor, mingling with the acrid smell of gunpowder. The beautiful stained glass above threw fractured colors over a scene of chaos. Isabella crouched low behind a stone column, her mind snapping into full operational mode. Every inch of St. Augustine Cathedral became part of her battlefield map. The towering pillars, the narrow aisles, the deep shadows cast by flickering candlelight. She shifted her breathing, steady and silent, letting the AR-15 rest lightly in her grip. She knew the remaining hostiles, 9 now, were trying to triangulate her position. That gave her a single advantage. They were thinking about her, not about the civilians. From somewhere in the left transept, Silva's voice barked, "She's behind the altar." Perfect. Isabella slapped the butt of her rifle against a fallen pew, creating a sharp echo, then darted in the opposite direction. The sound drew fire instantly, shotgun blasts tearing into wood where she'd been moments before. While they reoriented, she slipped between 2 columns, moving like a shadow toward the south aisle. Kurt appeared ahead, sweeping the area with his pistol. Isabella waited until his focus passed her position, then burst from behind the column. 2 quick shots, one to the shoulder, one to the leg, sent him sprawling with a cry. She kicked his weapon away without slowing down. The gunmen were trained, but not for this. Not for someone who fought like she did, using the cathedral itself as both shield and weapon. She slid behind a heavy oak pew, bracing the rifle on its edge. Through the gap, she caught sight of Brett advancing along the far aisle, using a terrified wedding guest as a human shield. Isabella's finger tightened, then eased. She couldn't risk the shot. Not yet. Instead, she grabbed a brass offering plate from the pew and hurled it against the stone wall to her right. The sharp clang rang through the space, making Brett whip his head toward the noise. That half-second was enough. Isabella rolled left, lined up, and fired. The round caught him in the thigh, and he crumpled, the guest scrambling to safety. 8 left. She darted toward the altar, using its massive marble base as cover. From here, she had a partial view of the central nave and the right transept. Mendez, still by the entrance, was shouting orders, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty now. He could see the bodies, hear the groans, and knew control was slipping. Isabella took aim, her shot punching through the space between 2 pews to hit Rico square in the chest. He dropped instantly, his Glock skidding across the polished marble. 7. The others began moving less like hunters and more like prey, hugging cover, glancing toward the exits. The confidence they'd entered with was bleeding away, replaced by hesitation. She decided to press. From behind the altar, she fired 2 bursts toward Harlan and Mason, not to hit but to drive them into cover. Then she sprinted along the south wall, boots whispering over the stone floor, until she reached a confessional booth. The heavy wooden door muffled her movement as she slipped inside. From the darkness, she listened. Mason's footsteps were slow, cautious, his shotgun barrel poking ahead of him. When he passed, she kicked the booth door open, slamming it into his back. He stumbled forward, and before he could turn, she hooked an arm around his neck, yanking him off balance. The rifle butt slammed into his ribs. He dropped his weapon with a pained grunt. She finished with a quick disarm and shoved him down, zip-tying his wrist with a discarded cable tie from a sound system case. 6. Silva tried to flank her, but she heard his boots scraping over broken glass. She spun, firing twice. Both rounds hit his legs, dropping him before he could close in. 5. By now the guests were moving, herding toward side exits under the cover she'd created. She caught sight of Jonathan guiding Margaret and Samuel toward safety, his Marine training kicking in despite the chaos. Victor, one of the largest of the crew, tried to make a break for the doors. Isabella's rifle barked once, and he went down hard, sliding across the marble. 4. Harlan and Mendez were shouting at each other now, panic fraying their coordination. She used that to her advantage, firing short, echoing bursts from 3 different angles in quick succession. The sound ricocheted off the cathedral walls, making it impossible for them to pinpoint her position. In a final push, she emerged from behind the altar, moving directly toward the center aisle. Kane was still unconscious where she'd left him, but his men were faltering. Her shots came quick and surgical. Harlan's shotgun clattered away. Mendez's MP5 spun out of his grip. They both collapsed, groaning in pain, unable to continue. 9 down, 3 remained. And from the look on their masked faces, Isabella didn't need to see their eyes to know. Whatever plan they'd come in with had crumbled. The predator's swagger was gone, replaced by the twitchy panic of men who suddenly realized they weren't in control anymore. The tide had turned, and now the storm was hers to command. The echoes of gunfire faded into the high arches, leaving behind only the sound of labored breathing and the distant wail of sirens somewhere beyond the cathedral walls. Dust from shattered wood floated in the shafts of stained glass light, swirling lazily like confetti from some grim celebration. 3 men remained: Victor, Lars, and Mendez. Their weapons hung slack in their hands, fingers twitching as if unsure whether to grip tighter or let go. Isabella stood in the center aisle, the AR-15 steady in her hands, her veil torn and her gown streaked with dust and ash. The sharp, commanding edge in her voice cut through the silence. "Face down, hands behind your head, now." The order left no room for debate. Lars dropped first, the MP5 clattering against the marble with a metallic ring. Victor followed, his knees hitting the floor hard, palms pressed flat as if bracing against the weight of what had just happened. Mendez hesitated, long enough for Isabella to take 1 step forward, rifle leveled, before he too lowered himself, his weapon sliding away across the floor. From the pews came a wave of hushed disbelief. Some guests peeked from behind overturned benches. Others slowly rose, still clutching loved ones. A child's sob broke the stillness, quickly muffled by a parent's embrace. Jonathan stood frozen near the front, his eyes locked on his bride. The shock was plain on his face, not just at what she'd done, but how she'd done it. The clean precision, the controlled ferocity. This wasn't luck or adrenaline. This was training, years of it. "Isabella!" His voice cracked, low enough that only those near the altar could hear. Who are you?" She glanced at him briefly, her expression softening for the first time since the first shot had been fired. "I'm still me," she said, the words gentle but firm. "But there's a part of my life I never told you about." Her gaze shifted back to the gunman. "And now, everyone knows." Detective Samuel Hartman, her father, stepped forward cautiously. The pride in his eyes was tempered by a professional understanding of the next steps. "We need to secure the scene until NOPD gets here," he said quietly. "I know," Isabella replied without missing a beat. She motioned to 2 of the ushers, both off-duty deputies she'd recognized earlier in the ceremony. "Zip ties, bind their wrists tight, keep them spread out. No one leaves until the police arrive." The men moved quickly, their hands steady despite the surrealness of taking orders from a bride in a torn wedding gown holding an assault rifle. Isabella turned to the guests, her voice carrying clearly through the vaulted space. "Everyone, please stay where you are. You're safe now, but I need you to remain calm until law enforcement clears the building." There was something about her tone, measured, calm, and utterly in control, that quieted the murmurs almost instantly. Margaret Hartman, still gripping the hand of a shaken guest beside her, looked at her daughter with a mixture of awe and understanding. She'd suspected there was more to Isabella's years away from home, but seeing it revealed so starkly was still breathtaking. Jonathan slowly approached, his steps hesitant, as if unsure whether to embrace her or salute her. "Special Forces?" he asked under his breath. She nodded once. "Call sign Valkyrie. I served 6 years. I meant to tell you, just not like this." He exhaled, the corners of his mouth twitching toward a wry smile, despite the wreckage around them. "Guess there's no going back to a normal wedding day after this." From outside, the sirens grew louder, echoing off the French Quarter streets. Red and blue light began to flash against the stained glass, refracting into the cathedral in shards of color. "Positions," Isabella said sharply to the usher's deputies. "When SWAT comes in, I want everyone on the floor, hands visible. No sudden movements." She glanced back at the restrained gunman. "And make sure these three don't so much as breathe without you knowing about it." By the time the first tactical officer swept in, rifles raised, the scene was already under control. 12 hostiles neutralized, 200 guests alive and unharmed, and in the center of it all stood a bride, calm, unshaken, rifle cradled as if it belonged there. She handed the AR-15 to the lead officer without ceremony, then straightened her gown as if preparing for the next dance. "The scene is yours, Lieutenant," she said. The officer paused, clearly wanting to ask questions, but caught the subtle shake of Detective Hartman's head. There would be time for that later. For now, everyone was still processing what they'd just witnessed. Jonathan finally stepped beside her, lacing his fingers through hers. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. And for the first time since the doors had burst open, Isabella allowed herself a single, slow breath. One that carried both relief and the quiet knowledge that her life would never again be the same. The last of the restrained gunmen were being escorted out when Lieutenant Naomi Pierce stepped into the cathedral, her SWAT team fanning out behind her. She was tall, sharp-eyed, and carried herself with the crisp efficiency of someone who'd been in command for a long time. Her gaze swept the room, assessing, cataloging, and then it landed on Isabella. Pierce froze mid-step. "You've got to be kidding me," she murmured almost to herself. "Valkyrie?" The name rippled through the few officers close enough to hear it. Isabella gave a small nod, lowering her gaze in quiet acknowledgement. "I read your file in tactical school," Pierce continued, stepping closer. "They still teach your urban containment drills. Never thought I'd see the day I walked into your op, let alone at a wedding." "This wasn't an op," Isabella replied dryly. "Just bad timing." Pierce's mouth twitched into the faintest smile. "You saved a lot of lives today, Hartman. Respect." With that, she signaled her team to clear the building and let the guests begin filing out. Within an hour, the cathedral was restored to something resembling peace. The pews were righted, glass swept away, and the lingering smell of gunpowder softened under the return of floral arrangements. Somehow, Father Thomas found the composure to finish the ceremony. When Jonathan kissed his bride this time, the applause carried not just joy, but awe. The reception that followed was unlike any wedding in New Orleans history. Laughter mixed with retellings of the chaos. Guests kept clinking glasses for toasts that doubled as tributes. "To the bride," someone called, "who could take down a platoon before dessert." Even Jonathan joined the ribbing, though every time he looked at Isabella, there was a softness that cut through the humor, a mixture of pride and deepening respect. Then just as the music shifted to a slow waltz, the ballroom doors opened again. A man in a press dress uniform stepped inside, silver hair catching the light. Colonel Matthew Royce. Isabella stiffened. Jonathan felt her hand tighten. "Valkyrie," Royce said, approaching with measured steps. His voice was lower than she remembered, but it still carried the weight of command. "It's been a long time." "Colonel," she acknowledged, tone guarded. "I came to say something I should have said years ago," Royce began. "When you broke protocol to save those civilians, I followed orders and signed off on your discharge. It was wrong. We were wrong. And after what I've seen today, there's no doubt in my mind, you were, and still are, one of the best." The ballroom had gone quiet, every ear tuned to the exchange. Royce reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "I'm heading a joint training program for special operations. Civilian contract. Your terms, your schedule. We need someone who's been there. Someone like Valkyrie." Isabella hesitated, eyes flicking to Jonathan. He gave her a small nod. "I'll consider it," she said finally. Royce smiled faintly. "That's all I can ask. And thank you for today and for everything before." As he left, the music resumed. Isabella and Jonathan returned to the dance floor, the swirl of her gown catching the warm light. Around them, guests laughed, glasses clinked, and the mood lifted again. But in Isabella's mind, a quiet truth settled in. She wasn't just a soldier of the past anymore. The world still needed Valkyrie, and now she might be ready to answer the call. The morning after the reception, New Orleans was quiet, the streets still damp from an overnight rain. Jonathan and Isabella sat side by side in the back of a town car, bound for the airport. Her gown was long since packed away, replaced by a simple linen dress, but the events of the previous day still lingered in the silence between them. Jonathan was the first to speak. So, no more secrets. His tone was light, but his eyes searched hers. Isabella looked out the window, watching the buildings roll by. No more secrets, she said finally. I spent years hiding that part of me because I didn't want it to define us. But yesterday proved I can't separate the two. I'm both the woman who loves you and the soldier who will fight to protect what's hers. Jonathan reached over, taking her hand. I don't love you in spite of that, Isabella. I love you because of it. You don't just protect people with skill, you do it with heart. That's rarer than you think. A small smile touched her lips. Strength isn't just about winning a fight. It's about knowing when to stand your ground and when to open your heart. You taught me that. They drove the rest of the way in comfortable silence, the city giving way to the open road. Ahead lay their honeymoon, a stretch of time that belonged only to them. Behind them was a wedding day unlike any other, a day that had stripped away every illusion and left only truth. As the airport came into view, Isabella leaned her head on Jonathan's shoulder. For the first time in years, she felt entirely herself. And that, she realized, was the greatest victory of all. In today's America, where life moves fast and people are often judged by appearances, the story of Isabella Valkyrie Hartman reminds us that true strength isn't just about skill or force. It's about the unwavering commitment to protect what we love. Often, the real heroes among us are the quiet, ordinary faces, neighbors, co-workers, family members, whose courage is hidden until the moment it's needed most. It raises a powerful question. In a moment of danger, would we have the calm and courage to act as Isabella did? And perhaps even more importantly, are we truly valuing and understanding those who quietly shoulder the responsibility of keeping others safe? I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you had been at that wedding, how do you think you would have reacted? Do you believe heroism is born or built? Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it moved you, please share your perspective in the comments. I read everyone. And if you want more stories that inspire, challenge, and remind us of the courage we're all capable of, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and join our growing community. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who can change everything.